The first time she called 911 on me, I thought it was a prank. I was standing in my own driveway, holding the garage remote, watching the Camaro roll into the sunlight when I heard her voice. Sharp, shrill, cutting through the quiet like a fire alarm. "That's my car. He's stealing my car." Across the street, Margaret, our HOA president, self-proclaimed protector of community standards and part-time suburban tyrant, was already dialing on speakerphone so the whole block could hear. Her face was twisted in righteous fury, like she'd caught a criminal red-handed instead of watching a mechanic open his own garage. The operator on the line asked her for details. She rattled them off with the confidence of someone auditioning for a crime show. "Red Camaro, stolen less than 24 hours ago. Thief is attempting to flee the scene." Flee the scene? I hadn't even put the keys in the ignition. Neighbors peeked out of blinds, cell phones appeared, and within minutes, 2 squad cars rolled up, lights flashing. Imagine trying to explain to uniformed officers that you're not stealing a car. You're polishing the same car you've restored bolt by bolt for 5 years. Imagine your HOA president screaming over you, waving a clipboard like it's the Constitution, demanding your arrest. That was the day I realized this wasn't just about a car. It was about control. It was about a woman who thought her title gave her the power to ruin lives. And it was the day I decided I wasn't backing down. Because what started as a ridiculous accusation in a driveway was about to explode into one of the most unbelievable HOA meltdowns you'll ever hear. So buckle in, because this is the story of how a Karen tried to have me arrested for stealing my own Camaro, and how it ended with her in handcuffs instead. And hey, if you enjoy seeing neighborhood tyrants finally face the consequences, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. You might just see them featured in the next video. It started on the kind of morning where nothing should have gone wrong. The sky was a perfect Arizona blue. The desert heat hadn't quite set in yet, and I was standing in my garage with a mug of coffee balanced on the workbench while I tinkered with the ignition system of my second project car. The Camaro, the one that had already stirred up more drama than any 4 wheels should, sat polished and gleaming behind me, a reminder that sometimes beauty comes with baggage. But today, my focus was on the GTO frame I'd been resurrecting from what most sane people would call scrap metal. Music played low from the radio, classic rock mixing with the rhythmic click of my socket wrench. Peaceful, almost meditative, until the shrill bark of a woman's voice shattered it all. Excuse me, sir, what exactly do you think you're doing?" I froze mid-turn, the wrench slipping from my fingers and clattering onto the concrete. There she was, not Brenda. Brenda was still serving her well-earned prison time, but her spiritual successor. A woman in her early 50s, platinum blonde curls stiff with hairspray, oversized sunglasses reflecting my entire garage like a surveillance camera. She stood at the edge of my driveway with the posture of someone who thought she owned the land she was standing on. I didn't recognize her. New neighbor, maybe, or worse, visiting relative of an old one. I wiped the grease from my hands and offered what I hoped was a neutral smile. "Morning, just working on my car." She tilted her head like I'd spoken in code. "This garage," she said slowly, her tone dripping with false authority, "isn't yours." I blinked. "Pretty sure it is. Name's on the mortgage and everything." Her lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Funny, because I just signed closing papers on this property 3 days ago. The realtor told me the former owner left it tie." She whipped out a folded packet of papers from her purse like she was pulling the ace of spades. I could see the bold letters of a generic online real estate template, but nothing about it looked official. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I've lived here for 5 years, paid property taxes just last month. Either you've been scammed or you're trying really hard to scam me." That's when she pulled out her phone. "I don't have time for this nonsense. I'm calling the police. You're trespassing in my home." And just like that, my Saturday project turned into a déjà vu nightmare. Within 20 minutes, the familiar wail of sirens approached. 2 squad cars rolled up, lights spinning lazily in the morning sun. Officers stepped out, adjusting their belts, looking more tired than alarmed. One of them, Officer Daniels, who'd been there during the Brenda fiasco, recognized me instantly. His eyebrows lifted in a silent, "not again." "Morning, sir," he said. "We got a report of a home invasion?" The woman, who by now had introduced herself loudly to the neighbors gathering on lawns as Margaret, practically leapt forward. "Yes, that's him. He broke into my house and is squatting in my garage, tinkering with stolen cars. I want him arrested immediately." Daniels turned to me with the same expression a teacher gives a kid who swears the dog ate their homework. "Tell me you've got paperwork." I sighed, already heading toward the file cabinet in my garage. "You know me, officer. Binders in alphabetical order." As I produced my deed, registration, and utility bills, Margaret continued her performance. She waved her fake closing documents like a sword, declared that she had exclusive rights to the property, and even accused me of identity theft. The crowd of neighbors was growing, murmurs passing from one to another. It felt like a twisted encore of the Brenda saga, only this time the script had been recycled with a new villain in the starring role. Daniels scanned my paperwork, nodded, and handed it back. "All in order. Same address, same VIN on the Camaro we verified last year. You're clean." He turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, can we see your documents?" She thrust them into his hands with the confidence of a gambler going all in. Daniels skimmed the pages, then suppressed a laugh. "These are purchase inquiries from a real estate listing site, not closing documents, and the address listed is for the house 2 streets over, not this one." The color drained from Margaret's face, but she doubled down like all Karens do when cornered. "That's a clerical error. The realtor told me this house was mine." Daniels pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, unless you've got a signed deed and proof of sale, you don't own this property. Right now, all I see is a man working in his own garage while his neighbor is making false police reports." The murmurs in the crowd shifted from confusion to barely concealed amusement. Someone even snickered. Margaret's sunglasses slipped down her nose, and for the first time she looked less like a queen and more like a gambler caught cheating. But I knew better. This wasn't over. People like Margaret didn't back down after one failed performance. This was just Act 1 of whatever circus she was about to unleash. And judging by the fire in her eyes as the officers gently suggested she return home and verify her information, I had the sinking feeling the encore was going to make Brenda look like amateur hour. Margaret didn't leave quietly. Of course she didn't. The officers had barely made it back to their cruisers when she spun on her heels, adjusted her oversized sunglasses, and snapped at me in a voice designed to carry across half the block. "You may have fooled them with your little fake papers, but I know the truth. That car," she jabbed a manicured finger at the Camaro, "was listed online last month. I was supposed to buy it. You probably stole it before the deal closed." The neighbors who hadn't already seen Brenda's greatest hits were gawking like this was live theater. A few whispered, most shook their heads. Tom, my next-door neighbor and unofficial HOA whistleblower since Brenda's fall, muttered loud enough for me to hear. "Here we go again." I clenched my jaw, reminding myself of the lessons I'd learned during the Brenda fiasco. Stay calm, document everything, and never underestimate how far entitlement can stretch. "Margaret," I said evenly, "this Camaro has been mine for years. It's not for sale, it's not stolen, and it's definitely not yours." She gave a sharp laugh, the kind people use when they've already lost but refuse to admit it. "We'll see about that. You're not going to intimidate me. I've dealt with your type before." Then she turned, stomped down the driveway, and disappeared into her immaculate white SUV parked a few houses away. The crowd dispersed slowly, with lots of knowing glances in my direction. A couple of folks gave me sympathetic smiles. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "She's either crazy or she's got a plan. Watch your back." I didn't need the warning. By the time I closed the garage that night, I'd installed fresh batteries in every security camera, checked the locks twice, and emailed myself a copy of the body cam footage I'd requested from Daniels. Experience had taught me that people like Margaret didn't retreat. They regrouped. The regrouping started the next morning. At exactly 8 a.m., a notice appeared on my front door. It was printed on cheap copy paper, but stamped with a logo I recognized instantly. FHUA, Fairhaven United Association. Except here's the problem. We didn't have an FHUA. Willowbrook had dissolved its corrupt HOA after Brenda's downfall. Our neighborhood was governed by nothing but ordinances and the collective will to never give power to another dictator again. The notice demanded that I cease and desist all unauthorized automotive activity on the property. It claimed my garage was a restricted area for mechanical repair and that I faced daily fines up to $500 for violations. At the bottom, in bold red letters, was a signature line, Margaret Whitmore, Acting Compliance Officer, FHUA. I laughed out loud. Then I took a picture of the notice, sent it to Tom, and waited. 10 minutes later, he was on my porch holding his coffee mug. He read the paper, snorted, and muttered, "She's trying to build a fake HOA. This woman's insane." "Or dangerous," I said. "Remember Brenda? It started small. A few complaints, a few threats. Next thing we knew, she was filing fake police reports and shredding financial records in the middle of the night." Tom grimaced. "Yeah, but Brenda at least was the president of a real HOA. This Margaret doesn't even have a foothold. It's all smoke and mirrors." "Maybe, but smoke and mirrors can fool a lot of people if you don't clear the air fast enough." By noon, 3 more neighbors had received identical notices taped to their doors. Linda texted me a picture of hers with the caption, "Tell me this is a bad joke." Sarah, my girlfriend, the forensic accountant whose audit had destroyed Brenda's empire, called immediately. "Marcus, if she's trying to fabricate authority, that's fraud. And if she collects even $1 in fake fines, that's felony territory." The problem was, Margaret wasn't playing in the dark. She was loud, public, and convincing enough to sway the uninitiated. By evening, she'd set up a folding table at the community park entrance with a banner that read, "Fairhaven United Association, protecting property values since 2025. She handed out glossy flyers warning about unapproved vehicle storage and illegal garage usage. She even had a clipboard for signatures, recruiting neighbors and mamas into her fantasy world. I drove past on my way to pick up dinner, watching in disbelief as 2 families actually stopped to talk to her. One of them even signed her clipboard. My stomach sank. This wasn't just a delusion. It was a campaign. When I parked back in my driveway, Tom was waiting with his arms crossed. "She's not just bluffing, she's building something." I nodded, the weight of déjà vu pressing down on me. "Then we document, we organize, and we cut her off before she becomes Brenda 2.0. But even as I said it, I knew Margaret was different. Brenda had wanted control, status, money. Margaret? She wanted ownership of everything around her, my garage, my car, my community, and people like that didn't stop until they were forced to. And sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to find an envelope in my mailbox labeled Notice of Seizure, Property Vehicle. Inside was a printed letter declaring that Margaret, on behalf of FHUA, was taking possession of my Camaro for failure to comply with neighborhood standards. The kicker? She'd signed it with the title Chief Enforcement Officer. This wasn't just a fake HOA anymore. Margaret was trying to steal my life piece by piece. I stared at the letter, the paper trembling slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity. Margaret hadn't just escalated, she'd launched herself into another stratosphere of delusion. A fake HOA was one thing. Claiming legal seizure of my car? That was theft wrapped in printer ink. I snapped photos of the letter, front and back, then slid it into a plastic evidence sleeve. Old habits die hard when you've worked federal cases. Rule number 1, never touch evidence without preserving its integrity. By the time I walked into the kitchen, Sarah was already on speakerphone. "Marcus, I saw your text. This isn't funny. A fake HOA threatening seizure crosses into criminal imperso. Nation and attempted fraud." "Attempted?" I said, pacing. "Feels like she's already trying to rob me." Sarah's voice dropped, serious and deliberate. "You need to treat her like an organized criminal, not a cranky neighbor. Document everything. Build a timeline. If she puts her hands on that car, call it in as Grand Theft Auto." Tom showed up again within the hour, still holding his eternal mug of coffee. He read the letter and shook his head in disbelief. "She's worse than Brenda. At least Brenda pretended to follow bylaws. Margaret's just making it up as she goes." "Yeah," I muttered. "And somehow she's still getting traction." Because traction she was. That evening, Margaret was back at her little folding table, this time with a small crowd gathered around. I counted 6 neighbors, including Janet, the same one who'd abstained during the Brenda vote. Janet had always been a little too eager to align herself with authority, real or imagined. As I approached, Margaret spotted me and raised her voice, her words carrying across the park. And there he is, the thief who thinks he can hoard stolen property in plain sight. The crowd turned. Whispers rippled. My jaw tightened, but I forced calm. Margaret, I said, stepping forward, if you accuse me of a crime in front of witnesses, you'd better have evidence. She smirked. The evidence is clear to anyone with eyes. That Camaro was listed online weeks ago. You swooped in and snatched it. Classic opportunist. I blinked. She was talking about a completely different car. I'd seen the ad, similar model, different year, different VIN. She'd convinced herself they were the same. Or worse, she was deliberately twisting it. Wrong car, I said evenly. Mine's been in my garage since before you moved here. You'd know that if you bothered with facts instead of fantasies. Her eyes narrowed. Facts don't matter when everyone knows the truth. That Lee made my stomach flip. It was the same mantra Brenda had used when cornered. If you repeat a lie loud enough, it becomes truth. The crowd was restless. Some neighbors looked unconvinced. Others looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to slip away but didn't want to be noticed. Janet, of course, nodded vigorously, clutching Margaret's flyer like it was gospel. I raised my phone and hit record. This is Marcus Rivera, documenting an attempted fraud by Margaret Whitmore, who is impersonating an HOA that doesn't exist. She has distributed false seizure notices and is attempting to claim ownership of my personal vehicle. Margaret's face darkened. Turn that off. No, I said calmly, holding the phone steady. Not until you stop harassing me and my neighbors. For a moment she froze, caught between her performance and the reality of being filmed. Then she spun, snatched her clipboard, and stormed off toward her SUV. The crowd dissolved, murmuring. Tom leaned close, whispering, "You just poked the hornet's nest." He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, I discovered just how far Margaret was willing to go. My security camera pinged at 3:47 a.m. The feed showed Margaret creeping up my driveway, flashlight in hand. She wasn't subtle. Her heels clicked against the pavement like a metronome. She shined the light across my garage door, scribbled something onto a clipboard, then pressed what looked like a bright orange sticker against the metal. By morning, the sticker turned out to be a massive decal reading, "Vehicle impounded by order of HOA, do not remove." The audacity was breathtaking. But what chilled me wasn't the sticker itself. It was the lockbox she'd attached to the side of my garage, as if she were preparing for a towing company. Margaret wasn't just bluffing anymore. She was preparing to take my car. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with fake fines and nuisance complaints. Margaret's delusion was metastasizing into action, and if I didn't shut her down soon, I'd wake up to an empty garage. The sun hadn't even fully risen when I called Sarah. She answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. "Marcus, do you know what time it is?" 4:45, I said, pacing the driveway, phone in one hand, evidence bag in the other. Margaret just tagged my garage like it's a repo order. She attached a lockbox. A lockbox, Sarah. That woke her up fast. "Send me pictures, now." I snapped photos from every angle. The decal, the adhesive residue, the lockbox screwed into the siding like she had authority. My phone buzzed with her incoming texts before I even hung up. "Preserve everything. That's evidence of criminal tampering and property damage." Tom rolled up not long after, still in pajama pants, robe flapping, coffee steaming like always. He squinted at the sticker, then muttered, "Well, she's officially gone off the deep end. This isn't HOA Karen 2.0. This is HOA Karen with power tools." Linda came jogging over too, sneakers squeaking on the asphalt. She had her phone out, already recording. "Don't touch it yet. Let the cops see." I hesitated. Calling the police on a neighbor is never something you do lightly, but Margaret had crossed so many lines she was halfway to another state. Besides, if she was willing to come onto my property in the middle of the night, what would stop her from calling a tow truck while I was at work? So I dialed 911. When the officer arrived, Margaret was conveniently already outside, fussing over her mailbox with a watering can like she'd been gardening at dawn. The cop, a young guy named Officer Reynolds, walked over with his notebook. "Morning, folks. Who made the call?" "That'd be me," I said, stepping forward. I gestured at the sticker and lockbox. This woman came onto my property overnight and attached these. She's impersonating a homeowners association that doesn't exist. Margaret dropped her watering can with a dramatic clang. Excuse me, officer, don't listen to him. I'm the president of the Fairhaven Homeowners Association. That vehicle is under investigation. He's hiding stolen property. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I've been patrolling this neighborhood for 3 years. There is no Fairhaven Homeowners Association. Margaret's face twitched, but she recovered fast. We were recently incorporated. The paperwork is pending. He'll say anything to cover his theft. I handed Reynolds the evidence sleeve with the letter. All printed by her. She's distributing fraudulent seizure notices. That's impersonation of a legal entity, attempted fraud, and trespassing. The officer studied it, then turned back to Margaret. Ma'am, do you have any official documents proving this association exists? She blustered. They're being processed. The county clerk is slow. Then here's the deal, Reynolds said, his voice firmer. You can't come onto someone's property, apply decals, or install hardware without consent. That's criminal mischief. You'll need to remove this immediately. Margaret's jaw dropped. You're siding with him? I'm siding with the law, Reynolds replied. If you believe his vehicle is stolen, file a report with DMV, but you can't take the law into your own hands. For the first time, I saw Margaret falter. Her cheeks burned red, her hands twitching like she wanted to argue but couldn't find words. Still, she muttered, This isn't over. The officer made her remove the decal on the spot. Watching her peel it off with shaking hands was the most satisfying sight I'd had all week. The lockbox was tougher. She had to fetch a screwdriver, and by the time it came off, her fury was visible in every stab of the tool. Reynolds warned her one last time before driving off. Ma'am, if I have to come back here for something like this again, you'll be cited, maybe worse. Margaret stomped away, but not before throwing me a look that could melt steel. Tom whistled low. Well, congratulations, Marcus. You've just made her enemy number one. Wasn't I already? I muttered. What I didn't realize then was that Margaret wasn't retreating. She was regrouping, and the very next move she made proved she wasn't just a nuisance. She was a strategist. By the end of the week, brightly colored flyers appeared in every mailbox. They read, Community Alert, Stop Vehicle Theft in Our Neighborhood. Suspicious activity has been reported at 221 Willowbrook. A stolen car is being concealed in the garage. If you have been victimized, contact FHUA immediately. She wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was rallying the entire neighborhood, and for the first time, I wondered if she might actually convince enough people to make my life hell. The flyers spread faster than weeds in an unkept lawn. By Saturday morning, every doorstep had one tucked under a doormat, slapped onto a fence post, or taped to mailboxes like some bizarre campaign poster. The bold red letters screamed, Vehicle Theft Alert, as though Margaret had deputized herself into a suburban sheriff. I collected 3 copies just from my walk to the corner. Each had her fake HOA letterhead, complete with the official Fairhaven seal she'd designed on her printer. She'd even included a hotline number, her own cell phone. By mid-morning, neighbors started trickling toward my driveway. First, it was Mrs. Chen, clutching a flyer in one hand, frowning like she was trying to solve a math problem. Marcus, she said softly, what is this about your car? You know, I've seen you fixing that Camaro for years. It's lies, I assured her. Margaret made this up to scare people. There's no stolen vehicle. I have the title, registration, everything. She nodded, her suspicion clearly not at me, but at Margaret. That woman has too much time on her hands. Then came others. Mr. Patel from 3 doors down, shaking his head in disbelief. The Johnson twins riding their bikes. She, outing. Mr. Rodriguez, are you in trouble? And finally, Tom, storming across the street with a wad of flyers crumpled in his fist. She put one in my mailbox, he said, waving it like a flag of war. That's a federal offense. She's tampering with USPS property now. Sarah showed up 20 minutes later, camera bag slung over her shoulder. I counted 36 houses with these posted. She's staging a smear campaign. Her eyes flashed with the thrill of someone collecting evidence. This is defamation, pure and simple. But the problem wasn't the lies themselves. It was the doubt they seeded. People whispered, Cars slowed when they passed my driveway. One neighbor who'd always waved suddenly looked the other way. Margaret understood something terrifying. It wasn't about proving the accusation. It was about making it loud enough that people believed it might be true. That night, as if to drive the point home, she escalated again. At 11:30 p.m., I was in the garage tightening the alternator bolts when headlights swept across the wall. I peeked outside and nearly dropped my wrench. A tow truck idled at the curb. The driver leaned out the window. "Evening. Got a call about a repossession." My heart spiked. Repossession? That car's not financed. It's mine outright. He shrugged, holding up a clipboard. "Order came in from Fairhaven Homeowners Association. Said there's a delinquency." I couldn't help but laugh. A sharp, humorless bark. "Buddy, there is no Fairhaven Homeowners Association." By then, Tom had jogged over, robe flapping again. "Hey, this is private property. You touch that car, and it's theft." The driver hesitated, clearly not eager to get in the middle of whatever suburban drama was unfolding. "Look, I don't want trouble. If this isn't valid, I'm leaving." He crumpled the work order, tossed it on his passenger seat, and drove off. But I wasn't relieved. I was shaken. Margaret wasn't just bluffing anymore. She was weaponizing outside contractors who didn't know better. Next time, it might not end with a hesitant driver backing away. The next morning, we gathered at Tom's kitchen table. Me, Sarah, Tom, and Linda. A stack of flyers sat between us like Exhibit A. "This isn't just harassment anymore," Sarah said firmly. "She's impersonating legal authority, falsifying documents, distributing defamatory materials, and now attempting to seize property by fraud." "Feels like organized crime," Tom muttered. "Except it's just one angry woman with a printer." Linda tapped her phone. "I've been researching. Turns out Margaret did file incorporation paperwork for something called the Fairhaven Community Alliance. It's not an HOA, it's just a non-profit she registered last month. She's trying to make it sound official." My stomach dropped. "So she's creating a fake HOA on paper to justify all this?" "Exactly," Linda said. "And if she keeps building her little fantasy, she might rope in enough neighbors to make it feel real." Sarah leaned forward, determination in her eyes. "Then we fight this head on. No more reacting. We expose her before she convinces anyone else." I looked at each of them, my allies in what had started as a neighborhood annoyance and was rapidly becoming a full-scale battle. Margaret thought she was building an empire of authority out of paperwork and intimidation, but she had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong people. By Monday, Margaret had taken her campaign digital. Our phones buzzed with a flood of posts from the neighborhood Facebook group she moderated, posts she conveniently locked so no one could comment. Big block letters screamed across every image. "Warning: stolen vehicle on Maple Lane." Below, a blurry zoom of my Camaro sat like mugshot evidence. She even tagged the local police department's official page, which made my blood boil. It wasn't just a neighborhood spat anymore. She was trying to drag law enforcement into her circus. That afternoon, Officer Daniels K. knocked on my door. The same officer who'd already been here twice over Margaret's 911 calls. He looked tired, like he'd spent the whole morning mediating domestic disputes and barking dog complaints. "Marcus," he sighed, resting one hand on his utility belt, "I need to talk to you about this supposed stolen vehicle." I gestured toward the Camaro sitting peacefully in my garage, gleaming after its fresh polish. "That one? Registered, insured, titled in my name. I can show you the paperwork for the 5th time." Daniel smirked. "I figured, but when someone tags the department in 20 Facebook posts, protocol says we check it out. Honestly, the higher-ups are getting tired of her, too." I spread the documents across my workbench, the title, insurance, registration, like a poker hand I knew would win. He skimmed them, snapped a photo for the file, and closed his notepad. "Looks good to me," he said. Then he lowered his voice. "Off the record, you should consider filing a harassment order. What she's doing isn't just annoying, it's targeted defamation." After he left, I paced the garage, fists clenching and unclenching. Filing paperwork against a neighbor felt extreme, but so did having a tow truck show up in the middle of the night. Later that evening, Sarah came by with her laptop. She'd been digging deeper into Margaret's HOA. "You're not going to believe this," she said, spinning the screen toward me. The website was laughable. Grainy clip art of houses, a slogan about protecting neighborhood values, and a PayPal donation link labeled mandatory dues. But she'd actually convinced 3 households to pay her $50 already. "See?" Sarah pointed to the transactions. "She's committing fraud. Real money's changing hands." Tom arrived minutes later, carrying his postal bag like a shield. "And she's putting HOA notices in mailboxes again. If she doesn't seat up, I'm reporting her directly to the postal inspector." Linda followed with a folder of her own. "I went to the county clerk's office," she announced proudly. "She really did register that nonprofit, but it gives her zero authority to collect dues or enforce rules. Legally, she's got nothing." We laid it all out like detectives piecing together a case board. Fake flyers, bogus incorporation papers, defamation posts, fraudulent dues. "Margaret's building a fake government," I muttered. Sarah leaned back in her chair, and like any fake government, it collapses once you shine enough light on it. The plan formed right there in Tom's living room. We'd gather evidence, every flyer, every screenshot, every fake notice stuffed in a mailbox. Sarah would build a financial timeline. Tom would document the mail tampering. Linda would handle the legal paperwork. And me? I'd keep my car safe and my garage camera rolling. What Margaret didn't know was that her own neighbors had just turned into an organized task force. But Margaret wasn't slowing down either. By Wednesday, a banner appeared at the neighborhood entrance. White bedsheet, red spray paint. "Say no to crime. Boycott Marcus Rodriguez." Cars stopped to gawk. Kids pointed. Someone even honked in support before realizing what it was about. That night, I found the banner in my driveway, cut down and thrown like a trophy. Margaret stood across the street with her phone, recording. "You can't silence the truth," she shouted, her voice shrill against the crickets. "This community deserves protection." I held up my own phone, recording her back. "And the truth is going straight to the DA's office." For a moment, her face faltered, just a flicker of panic before she twisted it back into righteous fury. That's when I realized something important. Margaret wasn't just playing a power game anymore. She was cornered, desperate, and dangerous. And desperate people made mistakes. The following morning, my doorbell camera caught exactly the kind of mistake I'd been waiting for. At 5:42 a.m., Margaret crept onto my driveway in her bathrobe, clutching a clipboard and a roll of red tape. She crouched in front of the Camaro, carefully sticking a giant violation impound pending notice to my windshield. She looked over both shoulders, scribbled something on her clipboard like a cartoon villain, and scurried back across the street. By the time I walked outside, the paper was flapping in the breeze like a scarlet letter. The wording was pure nonsense. HOA Rule 7.3, unauthorized vehicle, removal within 24 hours, no signature, no official letterhead, just bold letters and intimidation. I peeled it off, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and added it to our growing evidence folder. When Tom came by with his morning route, I showed him the footage. He whistled low. "She's done," he said. "Mail tampering is one thing, but impersonating legal authority on private property? Judges eat that up." We decided it was time to stop reacting and start building the official case. Sarah had already compiled a spreadsheet of every fraudulent transaction Margaret had collected. $75 here, $100 there, totaling nearly $1,000 skimmed in just 2 weeks. Linda, meanwhile, had drafted a cease and desist letter citing state fraud statutes. But the real breakthrough came when I checked my garage cameras later that day. Not only had Margaret stuck the fake violation notice, but she'd also whispered to herself while writing. The audio caught her muttering, "That car's mine. They'll thank me when it's gone. Can't let criminals ruin everything." It was delusion captured in high definition. That evening, we gathered in Sarah's kitchen to review the footage. She nearly spilled her tea when she heard the recording. "She thinks she's protecting the Nayas. Ich Borhood by stealing your car," Sarah said. "That's not just fraud, that's attempted theft." We all sat quiet for a moment, letting the gravity sink in. Margaret wasn't just playing HOA cosplay anymore. She had convinced herself she was judge, jury, and repo agent. Linda finally broke the silence. "It's time we involve the county prosecutor. Evidence this solid doesn't stay in a folder. It needs to be in a courtroom." We agreed, but deep down I knew the confrontation ahead wouldn't be clean. Margaret thrived on chaos, and once she realized the law was closing in, she'd lash out harder than ever. Still, as I slipped the violation notice back into the folder, I felt a new kind of calm. For the first time since this circus began, we weren't on defense anymore. Margaret had crossed the line. Now we had the proof to end her game for good. 2 days later, the story ended the only way it could, with flashing lights and Margaret's final performance as the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia. That morning, I was out in the driveway polishing the Camaro when she stormed across the street carrying a bright orange tow chain. Behind her, a rust bucket flatbed truck idled, the kind you'd rent for $50 at a hardware store. She was shrieking before she reached me. "Step aside. This vehicle is in violation of community standards. It has been repossessed under HOA authority." Neighbors poured onto porches with their phones raised. Sarah, already recording, whispered, "She just walked into her own trap." I didn't move. I let the cameras capture everything. Her waving the tow chain, her driver revving the engine, her voice cracking with manic certainty. Then, right on cue, 2 county cruisers rounded the corner. Tom had timed the call perfectly, telling dispatch that the suspect was in the act. The officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts, and one asked, "Ma'am, do you have documentation authorizing this repossession?" Margaret's face twitched. She held up her clipboard like it was Excalibur. "I am the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. This car belongs to the HOA." The officer took the clipboard, flipped through the blank pages, and handed it back. "Ma'am, this is notebook paper." What happened next unfolded like a scene neighbors would tell at block parties for years. Margaret dropped the chain, tried to climb onto the flatbed, and screamed, "You'll regret this! He's a thief!" The officers calmly cuffed her while she shrieked about community standards. The driver, realizing he'd been hired for an illegal repo, apologized to everyone in sight and drove off empty-handed. The arrest report listed charges of fraud, attempted auto theft, impersonating an officer of the court, and harassment. When they read her rights, she kept muttering, "I was protecting property values." But the property values didn't need her. They needed peace. By that evening, the entire neighborhood gathered in my garage, the Camaro gleaming under the lights, plates of Linda's cookies stacked high. We watched the arrest footage together, laughter mixing with a relief so heavy it felt like we'd been holding our breath for months. Sarah raised a toast with her sweet tea. To truth, to community, and to never letting one person bully us again. Everyone clinked plastic cups. Tom squeezed my shoulder. "You were the spark, Marcus. Without you standing firm, she'd still be running the show." I shook my head. "I didn't win this. We did. All of us." The Camaro sat quietly behind me, the car that had somehow become the symbol of resistance against suburban tyranny. I knew I'd never sell it now, not because it was worth money, but because it reminded me that sometimes standing your ground isn't just about defending what's yours. It's about reminding people that communities belong to neighbors, not dictators with clipboards. Weeks later, with Margaret awaiting trial, Willowbrook Estates finally felt like a neighborhood again. Kids rode bikes without being photographed, mail arrived without being tampered with, and on Sunday mornings when I opened my garage door, there were no screams, no accusations, only the sound of engines purring and neighbors waving as they passed. The nightmare was over. And the lesson was simple: document everything, stand together, and never underestimate what ordinary people can do when a Karen tries to play cop in your driveway. The American dream wasn't in the house or the car. It was in the people beside me, united, stubborn, and free.